Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie, and in today's video we are back on Primate Isles and we are building for potentially the most requested animal on the channel, and that is the world's largest rodent, the capybara. Now, these animals come from South America and they like to spend most of their time in the dense vegetation around rivers, lakes, ponds, marshes and swamps. They are of course semi-aquatic as they like to swim in these kind of environments. So what we're doing here is we are making sure that we've got room on our existing river, right next to where our lemur habitat is that contains the ring-tailed lemur and the black and white ruffed lemur. And we're just carving out a little bit of space for them to have their own little habitat right next to this large enclosure. What you can see me doing right now is using a chain link fence to mark out the perimeter of this habitat. The front is going to be nice and curved to kind of create this fluid motion and shape to it so that the path can go round in a nice organic way rather than looking super rigid. And then what we're going to do is start to personalize it a little bit. And what I mean by this is we're going to customize it by adding some building materials to it. We do of course need to adjust the height. These animals can actually have a relatively low fence. I believe it is at 1.25 meters that they needed, so that can be pretty low without them jumping out, which is quite nice. I do need to jump back and forth when it comes to editing the terrain a little bit, just because I want some variation in the land height and stuff. We don't want to just have all the ground be at one level and then water. Instead, we want to have a few little slopes, maybe a couple platforms and stuff, just to add a little bit of variation to the heights and what is the word? Elevation, yeah. Some variation to the elevation of the ground. Over at the fence we are doing our customization using just an East Asian plank. I believe this is part of the water wheel kind of set. What I'm doing is I'm just popping this on top of the fence, making it look like it's lining the top. I experiment with putting some logs at the bottom as well so that we got wood either, it's not either side is it, but top and bottom. However, once I add a custom post, because I don't really like these square metallic posts, once I add one of those, there's just too many different types of wood going on. So we're going to drop the logs, we're going to get rid of those from the bottom piece, and we're going to be using the square or rectangular, very rigid shaped African post that we've used already a few times in the zoo. So having this dotted throughout the zoo will actually kind of help with a bit of theming, even though it's unintentional. I'm going to try and keep using it going forward for that reason, to try and make a bit of a theme. So once I've got these fence posts and the nice little plank in place, I'm just going to copy and paste one post and the plank so that I can then go along to each recurring fence post and just pop these pieces over the top of it to customize our fence. I'm going to do this around the entire perimeter, or at least that's what I thought, but this just took way too long. So what I ended up doing was just reserving this to the nice curved part of the fence at the front, and the rest of the fencing I'm actually going to turn into the log fence, and I think it actually looks really nice because you've got a really sturdy looking fence for the majority of the perimeter then, and then at the front you've got this slightly more appealing to look at fence, which is where our guests are going to be. It just makes a little bit more sense for me for it to be that way. And with all the fences done, it is time to start adding some food related items. Now, as you can see, this habitat does effectively have an island in the middle, and that means that our keeper can't actually access it. So when placing our food items, we need to make sure they're in an accessible area, aka the banks of the river. On the island in the middle, we can place all of our fun and play enrichment items, all the toys, because they don't need any maintenance from the keepers. And then when we're done that, it's time to move on to the best part of any habitat build, and that is the plant life. I always make sure to add those bigger enrichment items first so that we can kind of smoothly add all of these other bits afterwards. The basic idea behind this decoration or planting of this habitat is to have a lot of rocks around the riverbed. I like to do this with basically all of my water sources, just because where the water will be flowing through it is going to be eroding the ground and stuff, and if there are any large rocks in it, they're going to be exposed, and they will last longer than just the soil that is on the riverbank, so they will be jutting out a little bit if they're there. I like to do loads of rocks for this reason, not just for the kind of logical reason that I just explained, but also because it just makes it look a lot more interesting. Having these varying textures and tones really helps to bring your habitats to life, so I always go quite heavy with the rocks. And once I'm happy with the basic rock layout, I start to use some mossy rocks as well and sink them in just for a bit of variation in colour. It kind of suggests there is moss growing on the rocks we've already placed, rather than having just entirely green rocks in there as well. After that, we're going to start placing a bunch of palm trees and stuff on the inner island, and then we're going to focus on the water plants, and we're going to be using some really big lily pads, plenty of reeds, and when you're placing reeds, I always like to focus them around these rocky outcrops, have them be quite dense there, because I haven't done much studying of how they grow, but in my mind they've got a bit of shelter from the rocks. Animals aren't going to be eating them quite as frequently as they're not in open water. I just feel like they're a bit better protected when they're up against rocks, so I feel like the growth of them would be more condensed in those areas, which is why I always focus my reeds and stuff near rocky outcrops. And in the real world, if you have a water source that's teeming with this much life, you're probably going to be having some algae. And obviously that's not a thing in game, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our decals page on the construction tab, and I'm going to go and get some moss decals. I am really happy I tried this. It's not something that I've done before. I believe that I saw it from Rudy. I will put a link in his channel in the description below. But what I'm doing is I'm taking some of the moss decals and making sure they are level to the water. And then I'm sinking them into the rocks and stuff and just having them poking out around the river bank. Mostly around the rocks, because the animals aren't going to be going too close to the rocks anyway. I want to keep the larger portions of the water quite open, as the animals won't be able to swim through these decals, they'll walk on top of them. So I'm going to try and keep the larger, more open areas where I want these animals to swim. I want them to remain quite large and open, therefore the decals are going to be kind of closer to rocks and stuff, closer to the edge, so that it's not interfering with the swimming area too much. But it has such a lovely effect. It really does make it seem as if though this water is teeming with algae, and it is just teeming with life in general. Now, whilst these plants are being planted, our vets are busy at work researching the capybara. And that is because the capybaras come with, well, they are quite iconic in this game for coming with these nice hot water pipes that they will sit under and have the water pour all over their heads, and the animations are just adorable, but we don't get them straight away, so we need to make sure we do a little bit of research. So I'm going to be adding those on slightly later in the build because I don't have them at this stage. So the next step after doing all of this plant work is to add a shelter. Now I did consider building some, but in the end what I decided to do was go for one of the pre-built shelters that we have in the game. In particular, it's the large wooden structure that has a concrete base, where it's just one beam that reaches up in the middle, and then two kind of parasol-y platforms come out either side. I think it's quite nice. That is one that I decided to use, and I plop it right in the centre of our island here, sinking the concrete into the ground so that they're actually just sleeping on the floor. When I see capybaras at zoos, they are one of those animals that quite often doesn't really have a backstage area per se. They may have an off-show area, somewhere that they can actually get a little bit of shelter, but it's not really that big and complicated. Normally it's just like a shed equivalent, so I'm not bothering with it for this build, but these animals are happy enough with what I've given them anyway. Immediately after that, we're going to be moving on to the rest of the plant life on the riverbeds, and we're also going to be adding those water pipes that I mentioned a minute ago, because the vets will have finished researching them by that point. And I'm going to place a couple large rock piles and sink those pipes into that, just to make them look a little bit more natural and less like they're just in the middle of nowhere. Make them seem a little less random by sinking them into some rocks. As for the plants are on the riverbeds, we are using a lot of bushes and flowery kind of things. We want this area to be quite densely packed with foliage because these guys come from jungles and forests and stuff. They are used to having a lot of plant life, so we're going to mimic that as best as we can in this habitat. Now, I have basically explained everything that goes on in this build, so I'm going to sit back and stop talking, let you guys just enjoy the rest of the time lapse, and then we will come back with some lovely cinematic shots at the end of the video. If you have enjoyed this video and you've watched it up until this point, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, but more importantly, if you're not already, please subscribe to the channel. The channel is growing quite quickly at the moment and I am very, very grateful, and I am loving having all the conversations that we are having in the comment section down below, so make sure you drop a comment so that we can have a little chat down there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.